you want to learn how much you don't know about something, write a book. This quip came to me and my colleague Laura Josepher as we were writing our second book, Performing in Contemporary Musicals. Truer words have never been spoken. It takes a certain kind of audacity to ditch one's imposter syndrome long enough to write an entire book. And it is true that Laura and I learned a tremendous amount while researching and writing, both about the industry and even about ourselves. Performing in Contemporary Musicals and my forthcoming book, Wholehearted Voice Pedagogy, are similar in that they were both created to fill a void in the current research. What is different about them, however, is that Wholehearted Voice Pedagogy, while research-based, is a much more personal endeavor. I wrote it based on qualitative information I've been collecting for over 25 years of teaching. And I have attempted to ground that knowledge in quantitative research. And that approach brought with it some unique set of opportunities and challenges. And so, just like Little Red from Sondheim's Into the Woods, I know things now, many valuable things that I hadn't known before. And that's what I want to talk about today. The important lessons I learned while researching and writing this latest book. Who knows, we may even come across a wolf bandying about in grandma's clothing. Stay tuned to find out. Hi, my name is David Sisco. My pronouns are he, him, and welcome to my little podcast, Wholehearted Voice Pedagogy. This podcast is dedicated to the art and practice of teaching singers. It is an extension of my forthcoming book, which I'm sure you're getting tired of hearing me talk about, of the same title, which will be released by Routledge Press in just a couple of weeks. Today, I'm foregoing my normal format. There are no guests. It's just you and me. I have a couple of things I want to share with you in advance of the book release, and it has led me to write this monologue of sorts. Nestled in this little monologue are 3 aphorisms that came to me through the process of writing the book. I believe that they're pretty universal and may therefore be of help to you as well. Now look, I realized that you were committing to about 30 so minutes of me talking at you, so I will try to be mildly entertaining and break up my jaw wagging with some musical interludes that I have composed, like this one. In the first episode, I shared with you 3 origin stories, anecdotes that led me to write Wholehearted Voice Pedagogy and start this podcast. If you haven't had a chance to listen to that episode, I want to recommend it to you. My very special guest was my friend and colleague, Dr. Felix Graham, and he had some really smart things to say about the power of narrative. I'll wait here while you check that out. I'm joking. So those 3 anecdotes, 2 of which came from my own training and 1 from an interview for a full-time voice faculty position, highlighted how powerfully voice teachers can impact the lives of their students. They have become an important guide to me in my teaching and, as I said, spurred me to write my book. But there were some other things that happened when I was conceiving of and dared to start writing the book, some experiences, quandaries, and even some bugaboos. And I thought it might be helpful to share some of those as well, just for context. The whole idea for Wholehearted Voice Pedagogy first came to me thanks to an invitation from the Australian National Association of Teachers of Singing. In 2016, I had the wonderful opportunity to present a series of workshops for the New South Wales chapter of ANATS. I guess it went well enough because in 2018, I was invited back to be one of their keynote speakers for the national conference held in the beautiful Blue Mountains of Australia, located just outside of Sydney. When talking to then ANAT's president and my now dear colleague, Shelley Holcomb, about my presentations, I explained that I wanted one of the keynote addresses to focus on how, not what, we teach singers. This set me on a research odyssey unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I spent the better part of a year reading vocal treaties, reviewing historical documents, digesting singer autobiographies, and thumbing through thousands of etude articles. This research became the basis for my first keynote, entitled, "What Does It Mean to Teach?" In the presentation, I talked about the work of Pier Francesco Tosi, Domenico Cori, Giovanni Battista Lamperti, Lotte Lehmann, and other teachers, specifically focusing on how they taught their students. I then brought the conversation into the current day with Elizabeth L. Blaze's fantastic book, A Spectrum of Voices. I posed the following question to attendees. How do we move beyond polarization and other contemporary challenges to reach today's students? I then proposed 4 essential pillars of holistic teaching: curiosity, vulnerability, mindfulness, and self-care. The day came to present the first keynote address. I was still a little jet-lagged, having flown in from New York 2 days before. But more than anything, I was nervous, incredibly nervous. The presentation was definitely research-focused, but I was also being very open about my journey as a singer, sharing many of those painful experiences I've already shared with you here on the podcast. And so when I started talking about vulnerability and saw some people getting up to leave, I thought, well, now you've done it, Sisco. You totally blew it. People are walking out of your first keynote address. Way to go. But it turns out that's not what was happening at all. Several conference participants came up to me after the presentation to say that they had to leave in order to compose themselves. They then generously shared with me their own vulnerable stories. And I realized that what I was speaking on was really necessary in our community. Later, the bones of this keynote became chapters 1 and 3 of Wholehearted Voice Pedagogy. Okay, look, I promised you breaks. Go get a sip of water, stretch your legs, check your texts, Instagram. I'll meet you back here in just a moment. There's been a growing movement in our community to focus on evidence-based, science-informed pedagogy, which I enthusiastically celebrate. Any singer or teacher can benefit from the study of physiology, acoustics, and more. I will be the first to admit I don't always understand some of the information, and it's not for a lack of trying. I will certainly continue striving for better comprehension. But I do believe that we all have a place where the sidewalk ends. I think as long as we keep trying to expand our island of knowledge, that's what really matters. Anyway, this led me to think about the definition of pedagogy. Merriam-Webster defines it as the art, science, or profession of teaching. Well, we have this ever-evolving science part, which is wonderful, but what about the art and practice or profession side of teaching? How do we balance what we know with how we impart that knowledge? Certainly music education is concerned with this, but see, here's the thing. My experience is that, and before anyone comes for me, I want to say that I'm not saying this is true all across the board, but my experience is that many of us who are now teaching voice received performance-based degrees, not music education degrees. And it made me wonder what I was missing out on and how we as a community can better balance our eagerness for voice science while also considering how to translate that knowledge to today's students. And so I started writing the book in May 2022. The first half was focused on the student-teacher relationship, and the second half on developing the singer's artistry. I threw myself into research and kept honing my vision. My goal was to bring together research from music education, mindfulness, neurobiology, psychology, sports psychology, and other arenas to illustrate the importance of investing in healthy, boundaried relationships with students. But that meant connecting a lot of dots, which was a tremendous amount of work. I couldn't decide if this book was the best idea ever or the musings of a madman, and I have to say that every day I came to a completely different conclusion. But I kept working at it. I first submitted sections of the book to a publisher in February 2023. Now, looking back on it, I should not have done that. I was just too early on in the developmental stages of the process. I had a strong outline for the book, but I submitted it with a draft of my first chapter on the evolving relationship between the student and teacher from the 16th to 20th centuries. The chapter was not ready for prime time, and it got ripped apart in peer review. I was told that the scope was simply too wide, and while I didn't agree with that feedback, there were comments that were embarrassingly spot on. I was definitely not ready for publication. But here's the thing. That's not what upset me. The manuscript needed work? Absolutely. What I found particularly jarring, however, was that some of my peers offered vitriolic pushback to the idea of the book. One peer reviewer wrote, "Clearly, David has an axe to grind." Wow, okay. At the time, I found that really devastating. I went into a full-on shame spiral and stopped working on the book for over 3 months. But suddenly, the following phrase came to me like a clarion call. Investigate your discomfort. I had to investigate my own discomfort with the feedback I had received. I was humiliated. My imposter syndrome is usually at a 4 out of 10 on a good day, so this brought me to an easy 13. Part of the issue was that first chapter. I was attempting to make a point about the master-apprentice model and how its more authoritarian leanings can show up in today's voice studio. While this can be true, I did not make a strong argument. As I hinted at in episode 2, the chapter needed to be more balanced. I want to take a moment again to thank my amazing colleague, Justin Peterson, for helping me find that balance. And I don't mind telling you that chapter 1 was the hardest chapter for me to write, and as a result, the last one to feel as if it was finished, as if anything we ever write feels finished. So in short, the first chapter was not where it needed to be. I shouldn't have submitted it. Chapter 3, which focused on those 4 essential pillars of holistic teaching, which I had presented in Australia, that was in much better shape. I should have led with that. Hindsight, am I right? But then I kept going back to that comment. Clearly, David has an axe to grind. That is quite a statement, wouldn't you agree? And it started to dawn on me that when someone pushes back on something that hard, it suggests that perhaps it's not just about what I wrote. Maybe my call to self-reflect on our actions as teachers made the committee member uncomfortable. And maybe they were unwilling to investigate their own discomfort. So, do I have an axe to grind? Well, I'm interested in learning how to circumvent traditional binary hierarchical student-teacher relationships in the voice studio. If that's an axe, then so be it. But then anyone who says that you have an axe to grind probably has 2 or 3 sharpening out back themselves. And so that comment, which I feel very certain was not intended to uplift me, ended up being the most helpful thing about that peer review process. And like the good book says, I shook the dust from my feet and I got to stepping. Fast forward to March 2024. Most of the book was now written, and I decided to try my hand at publishing again. But before I did, I made sure to have each of the chapters peer-reviewed myself by a diverse array of colleagues I respected. You'll find their names listed in the acknowledgments when the book comes out. I am so grateful to them for their insights and their candor. So, I submitted my book proposal to the second publisher along with approximately 60 pages of the book, including the preface, chapter 3, those 4 essential pillars, and final thoughts. And like every author does, I waited. A while. A long while. And I finally got back the following response. We did the peer review and we received generally positive reviews. There were a handful of people who were a little concerned about the tone and writing style of the text. We think it would be a good idea for you to send us another chapter for review. Have you written chapter 1 yet? I think that would be a good choice for us to see. This, of course, was not exactly the response I was hoping for. Certainly not the bloodbath I had experienced with the first publisher, but not exactly a ringing endorsement either. So I got brave and I investigated my discomfort. My first thought was, well, maybe I should give them what they're asking for. They seemed interested, and chapter 1 was in much better shape now. But then my inner voice chimed in. Hi, you sent them 60 plus pages of your book, and then you waited close to 8 weeks for a response to a peer review, and you received little less than 5 sentences in response. How do you feel about that? Also, what do you make of them asking for the same chapter that you sent to the first publisher? So I held space for those thoughts. And to be honest with you, it didn't feel great. The publisher's lack of communication was enigmatic of other issues I had already experienced with them. Also, while every publisher gets to decide what is right for them, I am of the opinion that 60 pages of a manuscript should be enough to decide whether or not they're interested in a book. And so, after some soul searching, I wrote them back. Quote, I recognize that the focus of my book might be polarizing to some. I believe this is the very reason it needs to be published. I have attempted to thoroughly research the subjects explored in this book and write in a thoughtful, balanced way. I'm not deterred by criticism, and I'm open to making edits so long as they are supportive of the book's central themes. Based on my previous publishing experience, I expected more definitive information from you, such as how many people expressed concerns about my work? What kinds of concerns did they have? Were they ideologically opposed to what I wrote, or were there informed insights that would improve the work? What kinds of positive feedback did my writing sample garner? And what does tone mean to you? To me, it signals that people were uncomfortable, which neither surprises nor bothers me given the book's subject matter. To what extent does this concern you, and why? What this experience has highlighted for me is that there's a misalignment in what I'm looking for versus what your publishing company provides. I've therefore decided to pursue other options. I thank you and your team for your valuable time. End quote. Whew. It felt audacious to say no to a publisher, but here's the thing. At the end of the day, it's my book. And if I didn't feel that the publisher was handling it with care, then why would I invest in that collaboration? This led me to my next clarion call. Find your people. And find my people I did. Researching and writing is lonely work. True, it can be inspiring to stumble upon an author you didn't know who is writing about pedagogy in a way that lights you on fire, but you're not directly connecting with them. That is, unless you do. I was reading Alex Chevron-Vinay's fantastic book, Equity-Centered Trauma-Informed Education, and thought, everything she is writing about is totally applicable in the voice studio. I have got to connect with this person. So I emailed her and thanked her for her scholarship. And she wrote back with a lovely word of encouragement. I have to tell you, it was manna on my journey. And I'm so glad to share her beautiful, wholehearted research as a resource in my book. A similar thing happened when I came across Dr. Harriet L. Schwartz's book, Connected Teaching. If you're a regular listener of the podcast, you've already heard me interview Harriet in episode 10. If you haven't yet, I absolutely recommend it to you. Her work is grounded in relational cultural theory, which was founded in 1978 by Jean Baker Miller, Judith V. Jordan, Irene Stiver, and Janet Surrey. RCT is a theory that explores how people grow through relationships and how culture impacts those relationships. Again, this research and Harriet's writing are wholly applicable to the work we do in the voice studio. Harriet generously invited me to join an affinity group of psychologists and teachers invested in exploring RCT's precepts and how to engage them in various scenarios in clinical and academic settings. Individuals I met in this group are some of the most thoughtful, intellectually grounded, and emotionally aware people I have ever met in my professional life. In a space of vulnerability and trust, I talked about my experience with the two publishers. One of the participants said, I went through 3 publishers for my book before finding the right one. Keep going. You're doing the right work. And so that's my third aphorism for you. Be patient, keep showing up, and good things will happen. I don't mind telling you that out of the 3 messages I received, this one was the hardest directive to follow. I am not a patient person, and let's just say I did not lick it off the grass. With great love in my heart, I do not mind telling you that the people that make up my family tree are pretty united in this character flaw. Frankly, I find it easier to be a human doing than a human being. But this book taught me to be patient and simultaneously dogged in my pursuit of publication. Thankfully, my tenacity paid off. A couple of weeks after I turned down that second publisher, I was at a conference in Philadelphia. I turned the corner to hear someone say, "David Sisco!" They pulled me aside and said, "I don't know if I'm allowed to tell you this or not, but I was one of your peer reviewers for your book, and I loved what you wrote. I enthusiastically supported it and can't wait to read the book." Later that same day, "David, I was one of your peer reviewers. Great job. I have a couple of resources you should check out." Ladies and gentlemen, my people, I want to thank those 2 beautiful individuals who kept me going. Thank you. In the first episode of the podcast, Dr. Felix Graham reminded us that it only takes one yes. That one yes came from Routledge Press. Now, I initially didn't submit my book proposal to them because I thought perhaps a more niche publisher would be a better call. But when I corresponded and eventually connected with senior editor Hannah Rowe, I was reminded why this was a better fit for me. Everything about Routledge's process was thoughtful, equitable, and transparent. I was honest and told them that my book had been turned down by 2 other publishing companies. They said, "We're not concerned by that. We see the value in the work you're doing." And so I got my one yes. And I started working with a lovely group of editors, assistants, and copy editors in Routledge's London office. Zoe, Neha, Christina, Luke. I'm looking at you. And now here we are. My book is coming out in just a couple of weeks. Well, that's my story. It's imperfect, just like me, and I'm sure that others might have their own perspectives. I mean, we all know that voice teachers are not often at a lack of opinions, but it's my truth so far as I understand it in this moment. And I wanted to share it with you because I think it's important you know where I'm coming from. I am not a burn it all down to the ground and start all over kind of guy, but much like my guest Maurice Goodwin in episode 8, I do ask why a lot. And that question led me to a bigger question. Is there a better way to support and encourage our students to do their best work? My prayer is that Wholehearted Voice Pedagogy provides for many a resounding yes. Look, I don't often find myself reaching for sports metaphors, but I swung for the fences on this one. And I didn't write this book because I lacked imposter syndrome. I wrote it because I believe in its message so deeply that my own personal discomfort was a small price to pay to have it out in the world. Who knows how it'll be received? But at least now you know the impetus for my writing it and the journey I took to get it published. Thanks for listening today. I pray that this jangled something within you. And if it did and you want to connect, please email me at wholeheartedvoicepedagogy@gmail.com. And as always, you can find me on the socials at Sisco Songs or at Wholehearted Voice Pedagogy. And if you haven't already, subscribe. I would love to share some of the upcoming episodes, which is going to include the release party for my book. In the meantime, investigate your discomfort, find your people, be patient, keep showing up, and good things will happen. Oh, and more soon. Take care of you.